Okay, we're recording.
Okay, I would like to call a meeting to order of the Finance Committee meeting for January 10th, 2023. And it's now, I think, 10:03 a.m. and we have a quorum of the committee present. Pursuant to Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021 as extended, this meeting will be conducted via remote means. Members of the public who wish to access the meeting may do so via Zoom or by telephone. No in-person attendance of members of the public will be permitted, but every effort being made to ensure that the public can adequately access the proceedings in real time via technological means. And I need to announce and want to remind everybody that this meeting is being recorded, and so that everybody is aware of that. So I'm going to go through the committee to just make sure that all members of the committee can hear me and be heard, and going alphabetically. We'll start with Lynn Griesmer.
Present.
Bob Hegner.
Present.
Matt Holloway.
Present.
Bernie Kubiak.
Present.
Michelle Miller.
Present.
Kathy Shane.
I'm here.
And Alicia Walker.
Present.
Okay, so I want to thank everybody. Let's see, I see that Sean is here and Amy is here. So what I'd like to do is, first of all, see if there's anybody in the public who would like to make public comment at today's meeting. And if so, ask that they raise their hand. Seeing none, then I think we can go on. I might ask for public comment again later if there are significant members of the public who appear. And I think it's okay at this point if you want to bring Councilor Haneke into the meeting from the attendee group. And so whoever can do that.
I sent a prompt, but she needs to
Okay.
click a button.
So with that said, what we're going to do in the order of the agenda is start with water and sewer regulations, and then go to the special act on residential property transfer fees, because one of the co-sponsors, Councilor Devlin Gauthier, is not going to be able to be present, and we want to respect Amy Rosecki's time, since she's with us, to pursue that right away. Sean, would you like to make any introductory comments about what your proposal is and explain the memo that you sent out? And for just for the record, I also want to point out that the packet that is available to the public has been expanded to include this item and all items that we're going to be discussing today. Sean, is there anything that you'd like to say in introduction?
Lynn, were you going to say something first?
Yeah, would you like me to put the memo up?
Sure. Yeah, so we put together this memo in response to this discussion at the Finance Committee at the last meeting, to try to lay out the impact of or at least the estimated impact of the regulations and the shift in line ownership. In going through that process and thinking about it more, we decided to recommend against including that in the regulations at this time. We do want to move forward with the rest of the regulations, but we think the the magnitude of the financial impact of that shift is worth us exploring for a longer period of time before we adopt it. So this memo lays out sort of just the background. You can go to the next slide, Glenn. So this chart provides the information that I think was requested by Kathy, which is to show sort of the rates and the trajectory of costs without the impact of the regulations, and then to show what it looks like with the impact of the regulations. And so what you can see here is the top chart is the Water Enterprise Fund, and the bottom chart is the Sewer Enterprise Fund. Both have rising operating expenses related to salaries and utilities and all the costs that go into those operations. Both are seeing rising debt in the future related to capital projects. In water, we have the Centennial project, which is a large one. Even with the grant we have through the state Clean Water Revolving Fund, we're still going to have a large impact, a large increase in our debt obligation in the Water Enterprise Fund. And in the Sewer Fund, we have the Gravity Belt project, which is reflected in the proposed debt section. So we're seeing costs rise anyway. And then the other thing that we want to monitor, because we're not quite sure where it's going to go in the future, is the projected consumption. So the projected consumption levels drive the rates pretty directly, right? So if the consumption's lower, the rates have to go higher in order to generate the same amount of revenue. So our rates dropped off quite a bit during COVID. We were hoping to see them bounce all the way back to sort of pre-COVID levels. We still haven't seen that yet. So we're showing projected consumption sort of conservatively at where it is now. And for water, you can see it's even a little bit lower than what we budgeted for FY23. So you can see in the light green, the estimated rates with and without the impact of the estimated impact of the draft regulations. The other piece, if you go to the next page, Lynn. The other thing we were looking into based on the conversation at the last meeting was insurance, and whether there is a program that could reduce the cost or the impact in the enterprise funds, and therefore reduce the projected rates. So we did talk with Home Serve USA, I believe it is, which is a pretty large company that does this type of insurance. Our initial conversation, they had sort of conveyed that they did think that there would be a program that would cover the sort of preventative type replacement of water and sewer lines, the ones we were talking about when we would repave roads. Once they dug into the numbers a little bit more, they came back and said they can't offer that program. So really the only insurance that we could get through them would be coverage for unanticipated repair or replacement of broken lines, and the cost in the water fund would be about $150,000 per year. They charge based on the number of lines, a monthly premium per line. And then in the sewer fund, it would be $310,000 per year. But again, that would just be for the unanticipated repairs and replacements. It wouldn't cover any of the proactive when we repave a road and want to address all the lines that are underneath that road. So we think that the cost of insurance at this time likely not be, it may be something we still want to consider when we go down this road, but we don't think it's going to reduce the cost overall. So again, in light of all that, the rising costs, uncertainty around consumption, rising financing rates, we think it's better to hold off at this time in regards to that specific piece of the regulations, and to do a little bit more exploration of that, try to get a better sense of how many lines need to be repaired and replaced over the next couple of years. And then we'll also have better information on our consumption levels going forward. And Amy can speak to some other elements or some other things that are in the works around drought regulations that might impact our consumption numbers, and some other things coming down from the state.
Okay, Amy, did you have a follow-up? Because actually what Sean just said was exactly what my question was, whether the rate, whether the consumption numbers might decrease as we implement state regulations regarding encouraging conservation of water use.
Yeah, and partly I know we've kind of been saying for years, hey, when we get our new water permit, we know it's going to have some restrictions in there for water, non-essential water use during the summer. We actually just last week, the state pushed forward regulations that is going to make that a reality much sooner than that, potentially even this summer. And they're putting pretty strict guidance on what counts as essential water usage in these times and what doesn't count. What this means for us is just that, during the summer, more likely than not, most of the time we're going to be saying people can't water their lawns except for maybe one day a week, and only outside of the hours of 9 o'clock in the morning to 5 o'clock at night. So a lot of those usages, a lot of the summer usage that we get, that's going to be down in the future. Hopefully that answers it.
I don't know if you or Sean want to comment on how that might affect rates in addition to what's on the chart on page 2.
Yeah,
I think
so go ahead, Amy, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, I don't know that we know the exact number that it's going to come down. I think it's just as we're looking at projected consumption, even over the last several years, even taking COVID out of it, we've seen this decrease as people have been more and more conscious about how much water they use. I don't know that we know the number, but I do think that projection consumption number is going to be a little lower, knowing that we have water use restrictions during many months, especially in the summer.
And in talking with Amy and Guilford, Amherst is a little bit unique. We say that a lot, but a little bit unique in that the summer isn't necessarily where our greatest water consumption is. Obviously, the university and the colleges sort of depopulate over that time. So it's just another wrinkle that we have to consider, is that the summer months may not be our busiest time for consumption, but we're still going to have to deal with these regulations.
Yeah, I'm going to start calling on other members of the committee now, but my concern is that since we know that from prior presentations that you've made that the fixed portion of the budget, the cap, just the equipment and capital and salaries is what drives it and not the consumption. So if consumption goes down, I assume that rates have to go up.
Yeah, the water and sewer fund, I mean, it's sort of like, when we talk about the schools and classrooms, right? So the things that really drive the cost in the water and sewer fund are how many sources of water you're managing, all the equipment that goes along with that. And so, the ways to make a dramatic change in the cost of in the water fund, for example, would be to have less water sources, but we're very cautious about anything that would reduce our water sources, because it's going to, we all consider that a pretty precious resource. Even if the state regulations say we can't use it, that's the problem. But those are the ways you make dramatic changes in the cost structures of the water fund in particular, is the number of sources that we maintain and the equipment that goes along with it and the staffing that goes along with it.
So I'm going to start recognizing other members of the committee with questions and that you may have. Bernie?
Thanks, Andy. I'm in general, I'm in favor of postponing any decision about the water main replacement repair, because I think it's more important that we get those other regulations in place. One question that I have is, do the proposed rates cover any prospective capital improvements? In other words, are we looking out, when we do these proposed rates, are we building in a percentage in the rate that would go into a fund, into the enterprise funds, for the purpose of replacing those mains at some point? Because if we can anticipate that we're going to have to do something like that, it makes sense to me to start setting funds aside for it now, in maybe a modest additional increase in the rates, with the intent of setting that aside could be helpful over the future. I mean, one of the things that every town does is they know that this is coming, but they don't plan for it or they don't act on it. Mm-hmm. So, if 5 years ago we started setting money aside, we'd be way ahead, and we may be a couple of years away from making any changes. So maybe we should start setting, again, a modest amount of money aside for this purpose.
Yeah, so it's a good question. So under our current system, yeah, so if you look at this chart, if it's a large capital project that we're going to borrow for, it shows up in the debt or current or proposed section. But if it's sort of the year-to-year capital type expenditures, we have that capital row, which covers things like water system improvements and those types of things. To your point about, and so the chart we've shown here is what if we put aside, $500,000 per year, but we could adjust this to show if we wanted to start to build up some type of reserve now, we could obviously modify this table to show what it would look like to do a smaller amount and then grow it slowly over time.
Okay, Bernie, anything else?
No, thank you.
Okay, Kathy?
Thanks. And thank you very much for this memo in the table. I have one question just to follow up on Bernie. And I don't need the answer right now, but Sean, you started to answer it with that capital line. My understanding is, and we've seen it in the budget, that we've got a reserve, and it's, that we're carrying a reserve in each of these enterprise funds, Bernie. So we are drawing on some of it. So I think that's correct. So that's just a question.
Yeah, enterprise funds have retained earnings, which is similar to a reserve. So just like the general fund budget, we have sort of guidelines with where we want that reserve to be, because it's used in a similar fashion if there's some sort of emergency need, or if our revenues don't come in, as expected, it hits that retained earnings account. So, but we do have a retained earnings in every enterprise fund that we have.
So it just, in the future, when we're looking at rates, it would be good to just see that table. I have it from earlier times. So my other question is just purely a question. The cost of the draft regulations, is that just if we did the repair? Have you, in the top band, there's some things we have to do anyway, and Amy said you had said that had some impact. So is the 3.4% increase, the first bank, does it include the everything else? And then we're seeing separately the cost if we started taking on the repairs ourselves. It's just purely a question on how I read this.
So the other thing outside of the line ownership, and Amy, correct me if I'm wrong, but the other thing outside the line ownership that will have a cost that we're not proposing we delay is the ownership of the water meters for the larger users. And I believe the way we're going to propose addressing that is through some changes to the fee structure. There's the flat fee for the meter fee, and Amy has done an analysis of what we would have to modify that to cover the additional costs of replacing those meters over time. So that we're not proposing a delay to. We would keep that in the regulations.
So is that included in the 3.4? I'll just say on the water line. So when I'm looking at,
it's not included here yet, but it wouldn't affect everybody, because it would be just for certain meter types.
Okay, thank you for that. And then my last one is around the meter size. I feel like I say this each time, but we talked about should we or could we, and what would the impact be, charge on those quarterly rates on meters? Could we go up on the larger meters, the big user meters like UMass, Amherst College, whatever, as a way of regularly recouping some capital costs? So I don't need that now, but that analysis was one of the things we were going to look at to protect us against insulate us a little bit more on the fluctuation on use, and trying to avoid hitting the households, the people who have the small meters, I'm using not very good technical terms, but little ones.
I get what you're saying, Kathy.
Thank you.
I can address that a little bit. And I guess it's a bigger conversation, obviously you guys guide, you know, like we can give recommendations and you guys tell us what you want to do. What I was proposing for the meter rates was essentially looking at the meter size, how often it has to be replaced and any additional annual maintenance, and then just breaking down, here's the cost per year for that meter. And right now with our current rates, because the town only owns below a certain size, those quarterly rates make sense with, you know, this thing gets replaced every 40 years and here's the cost for a replacement and there's kind of no additional maintenance. With the larger diameter, because the town hasn't owned it, they have a higher replacement cost. You know, we do annual calibration on them because if they're off, you want them to be on, and then there's typically a little bit of repairs. And so that's where that cost has gone. It's looking to recoup the cost, but we were purely looking at how do we break even on the meters. So what the town is going to incur in costs of this change get passed along to the owners of those meters.
Okay.
They're still paying for it. They're just paying us to maintain it rather than us relying on them to maintain it or replace it. So that is, you guys can certainly go beyond that if, you know, if you want to
Okay,
change the cost structure there.
thank you.
Hey, Guilford, I noticed you had your hand up a minute ago. Did you have anything to add at this point?
No, Amy got it. The meter rate or meter rental charge is just to replace meters. It has nothing to do with trying to balance payments for the big users versus the small users.
I think partly, Kathy, what you're getting at is like the thought of looking at rate structures in general, whether it's a tiered rate structure, whether, you know, business rates versus residential rates. And I think that's a conversation that I know you've been pushing for a while, and you know, separate but equally important, I think, you know, because there's a lot of different ways to do it. And even as you're suggesting, a lot of different ways to kind of make, you know, split who pays what so that we still recoup what we need.
Okay, and Bob, and then I wanted to see if Lynn had questions because she can't raise her hands while she's showing. But Bob?
Yeah, I just had a couple of questions. The first is, you know, you list 3 different scenarios on the top of page 3. Is the town covering the costs for 2 and 3 now, or does the town charge the owner of the lines for these replacements for 2 and 3?
Amy, correct me if I'm wrong. 2, we're not proactively doing that right now when we resurface roads. So there may be, I'm sure if they come across broken ones, they probably replace those or report it to the owner. But it's not a significant cost right now under our current system. And Amy, maybe you can weigh in on number 3.
Yeah, well, and I'll say even too, like, yeah, most of the time we're not doing that. There are obviously exceptions where we do replace, but typically it's only if we're replacing the water line, then what attaches to the water line may be replaced when we're doing construction. Number 3, these are new regulations that don't impact us now, but are going to impact us in the next few years. And so, you know, right now we aren't proactively replacing any service lines that are known or suspected lead containing, but there are going to be regulations in the near future that are going to force us to do a little more on that.
Okay. The second question I have, and Sean, maybe you can answer this, I don't know, but in your conversations with the insurance companies, did you get any rates for the actual homeowner, what they might have to pay in order to insure their water lines and their sewer lines?
So I didn't get, they can certainly provide that to us. They provided us 2 types of rates. They provided us from the main to the right of way, and then they provided us a rate if we wanted to cover it all the way to the house. So we did get the additional increment if we wanted to cover the whole thing. I'm not sure if I can take that increment and say this is what it would be for an individual homeowner. Paul, you may have gotten the rates because you had a separate conversation, but we could get that information, Bob, and we will. I think that's part of our plan is to communicate that information out to residents so they could opt to do that.
So if I can jump in on that. So yeah, so this is a company that offers this program to municipalities. What we do is that they ask us to help them market it to the customers. And then for some, I don't have the number in front of me, but it's like $100 a year or something like that. They'll do the water line, sewer line. They'll even offer you coverage for all your indoor plumbing if you'd like. They can insure anything, obviously. But this is a standard program that the National League of Cities brands, and then they offer it. This company offers it to any city or town. What they do is they contract with local contractors to do the repairs if it happens. And that's the sort of setup. I can get those numbers for you, though. I have those somewhere.
Yeah, I think it would be helpful for residents to know, what would it cost to protect themselves against these unanticipated costs.
Yeah, so I think it is something that was raised actually by one of the counselors before, and we got the numbers, and I think we can, if this, I think given this conversation, it was something we would sign up for and get that into everybody's mailboxes, basically.
Great, thank you.
So,
Lynn,
Lynn, did you have anything?
Yes. So I want to make sure I'm stepping back from this and saying, based on everything we're now seeing, the recommendation is that we go in ahead and pass the regulations and the bylaws, but we not change ownership of lines, meaning from the main line to the property line as we've been discussing. Would somebody just confirm that I'm understanding that?
Yeah, so that's what what we're proposing. It's not, in talking with Amy, she'll have to go through and if this is what the finance committee wants to recommend, she'll have to go through and modify the draft regulations to show what it would mean, because it's not a one sentence change. There's some ripples throughout the regulations that she would have to update. But if again she can do that, I think she's already started taking a look at it if that's what the finance committee wants to recommend.
Okay, my second point, and then I want to go to just a third thing. My second point is, my assumption is that with all of the noise out there about aging infrastructures, we're going to be seeing some federal and state programs that we may benefit from regarding sewer and water. That's just a statement. We don't know for sure, but as Bernie said earlier on, this is something, it's one of the hidden problems in every municipality that has these services. And so I want to just go back and say, I totally agree with Bernie. I think a modest rate raise to start having more reserves for the big projects that we could be seeing would be useful. And the time to do it might be this year, starting this year, because we're not going to be doing, if we follow the recommendation, we're not going to be doing the big, if you will, the big jump this year. Beyond that, though, what I think this has been most useful about, and I know we have spent enormous amounts of time on water and sewer, is we now have regulations that we're going to propose. We now have bylaws we're going to propose. We now know a lot more about what our water and sewer funds look like. And we've started to have that discussion about the critical nature of this hidden infrastructure that is aging. And I just want to thank DPW, Amy. I want to go back and thank Anna because of all the work she did with TSO on this. And Sean, you just continue to impress me with how you jump into any subject and understand the finances behind it. So,
well, this is all Amy here, so I support your thanking Amy for all the work she's done on this.
Yeah.
Can I just address one one comment that you made, Lynn.
Mhm.
About all that money out there. I know there's a lot of federal funds that are coming on stuff, and at least my understanding right now is how the state of Massachusetts has decided. Every state is allowed to allocate it differently, and the state of Massachusetts has decided to allocate it all through their SRF program, the state revolving fund program. And so it just means that it's at least in Massachusetts as compared to other states, it's going to be a little harder to get our hands on that because you have to go through this competitive application process, and it does have to be discrete projects. And there's a point ranking system and stuff like that. And so it's just not going to be as accessible for some of the, little maintenance projects everywhere. That's just how the state's deciding to funnel the money. So just kind of FYI,
So
that's
I
what we
do,
know so far.
that's useful, Amy,
Yeah.
and especially to know that we probably shouldn't count on that. I have two other, one question and one other just observation on process. The one question is, how much of our water and sewer money annually is paid for by our higher ed institutions? Is it 30%? Is it 50%?
I can, so they pay the same rate as everybody else. So it really just comes down to what percentage of our consumption they are, which I can get you that in a second.
The reason
I feel like they're between 25 and third, between a quarter and a third is UMass. And then I don't think I have the kind of rough numbers for Amherst College in Hampshire.
So and the reason I bring that up is because anything we do to these rates means our higher ed institutions are also contributing to our infrastructure. And I just want to make sure that we appreciate that, but also recognize that the cost to residents gets, yes, it increases as well, but the higher ed institutions also bear that same price cost. And then the other thing that I want to just mention is that TSO has made a recommendation that would differ from the Finance Committee. So this will have to go back to TSO.
And Lynn, on your question, so in the past, the university and colleges were a much larger percentage of our consumption. A lot of our declining, a lot of what we're seeing in declining consumption is related to the university and colleges. I think just putting in more efficient systems as they put on new buildings. So they used to be north of 40%. And FY20, which is sort of pre-COVID, they were about 30%. So they are still a significant portion of the revenue, but it's getting smaller.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, keeping going. But actually, Athena, you had your hand up, so I wanted to.
Yeah, Lynn just mentioned that it would go back to TSO. My understanding of the process would be that the recommendations from each committee go to the council and the council makes a decision from there, and that the committees would re-review. That's what we had discussed in the past.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing a little bit later. As the one person who's a member of both finance and TSO, I probably will report this at the next TSO meeting for information purposes. And if they decide to revisit their recommendation as a result, that has to be a decision, I think, of a majority of the committee.
Did GOL finish?
They've done the water regulations, but not the sewer regulations yet, and they haven't done the bylaws yet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I have another question, but I'm going to save it because I want to honor other people. Bernie?
Well, one of my favorite observations is deferred maintenance means broken. So my thanks to Amy and to Guilford and to Sean, our master of the spreadsheets here, for focusing in on this and keeping at it. And I think Amy's observation is correct. That is, the federal money trickles down into the state. This is considered small stuff, and they're not likely to fund this. So as we look at what we can get for the big stuff, we should continually look to see how we can offset funds or offset expenses to put against the put against this replacement. So thanks.
Kathy?
I think I'm about to say, I don't want to repeat what Bernie just said, but I didn't neglected to say I'm totally in support of the recommendations in this memo. And I thank you for putting it together. I would just like to be able, when we bring it back to the council, to add what Bob has asked for, that there is an insurance fund and residents can do it. So we're not just sweeping it under the carpet. And then my only other observation, Bernie, on that the federal money trickles down to the state, or that comes to the state and then it trickles down to us, whichever. I know none of us really know what's in IRA in terms of what water, sewer, infrastructure stuff could be billed, but I think we just need to be on the lookout whether some of the bigger stuff, there might be other sources of money to this giant thing that doesn't yet have regulations written to it. So just to keep it on our radar screen. That's a comment rather than asking anyone to do anything.
Okay. Paul? You're muted.
Just to go back to the question about how much the cost is. So for external water line, it's $6.75 a month. For external sewer line, it's $7.75 a month. For in-home plumbing, it's $9.99 a month. And there's a limit, $8,500 per call. So that's what gives you a framework for how much those insurance programs cost.
So there was one other thing that I had thought about. I don't know if it's feasible or not, so I just wanted to ask, and that is part of the problem that homeowners who suddenly have a huge expense because they suddenly have to do a major replacement of their line is, that they have to absorb it as an unexpected expense in the budget. Is there any thought that's ever been given, or any examples of other municipalities that have allowed people to pay that additional increment over time without interest to ameliorate the effect on the individual homeowner who's bearing that expense?
Do you mean, Andy, if the town were to pay for it and then finance it for the homeowner?
Yeah, and add to the bill over time as opposed to having them just pay it.
Mm-hmm. I'm not familiar with any system like that, but Amy or Guilford, have you heard of that? I mean, it's something we could certainly, again, look into as we go forward. If there's we don't want to necessarily be in the collection business in a new area, but it's something we could explore.
So there are other questions that anyone has from the committee at this point? If not, is there anybody who wants to make a motion?
Kathy, go ahead.
I'm trying to figure out how to word it, Andy, but
Thank you.
we have this memo, so I guess my motion is that to approve the recommendation that we move ahead with all the other regulations, but not the town taking over and then I need wording on what that is.
So in other words, we want to recommend to the council
Yes.
the
No change in ownership of the water and sewer lines or something like that.
yes. We want to
Yes.
recommend to the council not to change the ownership in water and sewer lines at this time.
At this time.
Does that capture people?
Yes, it does.
Okay, okay. So
That's
Kathy made
essentially-
that motion, I second it.
Right. Thank you,
So-
Lynn.
So it's, Kathy's made the motion and Lynn has seconded. And it's essentially a motion to recommend to the council that the council adopt the bylaw and regulations, except for the sections that change ownership of the line from the main to the property line. And I think what we said in our last committee report on the subject to the council was that it is possible to adopt the bulk of the bylaw and regulations and to postpone consideration of a section, which I think is essentially what the recommendation is, to put it off for 2 years and then come back to it and revisit. Sean?
Amy, you know the regulations inside and out. Can you just not adopt a section, or is it better to adopt the regulations just without the change in ownership?
I mean, I don't know that you want it's not as easy as just, we're not going to adopt this section, because like I said, there's trickle down effects other places. I think I would need to take a pass, like I basically would need to take a pass at the regs and update language. So there might need to just be a different version. I don't know if that, like, process wise, if that's the way to go, but it's not as easy as just adopting or not adopting a section, because there's modifications elsewhere, not just in the ownership section, that will be impacted.
And I
by
think you
this
want it to
change.
be, I think you want the regulations to be clear about where the ownership is. You want to have the ownership in the regulations. So I think it would be probably better to say to adopt the regulations without the change in ownership, and to be provided by Department of Public Works. They can provide that version.
And
Athena?
Thanks, Andy. I was just going to suggest that the council have an initial conversation because there are going to be conflicting recommendations from the two committees. So it might be helpful to have an initial conversation about where the council wants to go before Amy does the work of all of that, so that everyone kind of is in agreement before Amy goes through with all of those changes, and then we can present kind of a clean version once there is agreement. That would be my suggestion.
that
Well,
makes
what
sense.
I was thinking about doing, and I think we're maybe working into a solution along similar lines, is that I was going to talk to the chair of the committee, who's currently Anika, and another member of the committee who worked closely with Amy, who's Anna, and tell them about today's meeting and what's where the finance committee is, and then see what they want to what their suggestion is on the TSO side, because you know, this is just new information that was not available to TSO. We don't know what TSO would have done with the information had they had it. And but I think that the motion is clear enough that it expresses where the finance committee is based upon information that we have as a committee that was not available to TSO when it was considering.
I agree that works too. And I'll speak with Anika this afternoon about the next TSO agenda. I can bring that up with her as well.
Okay, because I don't know where we stand with meeting this week. I think the decision has to be made today. So we have a motion on the floor. Is everybody clear on what the motion is, or do we need it read back by the minute taker to make sure that he has it the way that we think it should be? Bill?
Yeah, you want me to, can you hear me?
Yeah, what do you have? Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Can you read back exactly what you have written down for the minutes? And then I want the maker of the motion, Kathy, and seconder Lynn, to just say that, yes, that's right. And then we're going to proceed to a vote.
Shane moved and Griesemer seconded to recommend to the town council that they approve the recommendations that there be no change in the ownership of water sewer lines at this time.
That works.
Yes,
Okay, we have consent. So
Yep.
thank you. That is the motion that's on the floor. And if any other discussion, I'll look for hands for about 10 seconds. And if not, I'm going to call for a vote. Seeing no hands, I'll go again alphabetically as I have been. So Lynn,
Aye.
Bob,
Support.
Matt,
I'm going to abstain.
Bernie.
Concur.
So it's a support. Michelle,
Abstain.
Kathy,
yes,
I'm a yes. Alicia,
Alicia unmuted, but I don't think we heard anything.
yeah, I don't know. Alicia, do you have a vote on the motion on the floor?
She can raise her hand twice for yes, once for no, and 3 times for abstain. That's an abstain.
Okay.
I don't know if that actually counts as a vote. I was joking. But
Yeah.
Pretty clear.
Alicia, are you able to confirm, or I'm going to ask a question right now. Is I have the vote. Athena, I think that Kathy and I and Lynn voted yes, so that's 3 votes and 2 abstentions from the voting members, so that the motion would pass, and then the support of 2 of the members who are non-voting. So I think that that means that the motion has passed.
Yes.
Okay. So is there anything else that people from the committee that the committee wants to ask of Guilford or Amy at this point? If not, we should let them get on to their other work.
Can I also just, Alicia was having trouble with her sound. You might need to go to the far left, and I know if it's not muted, but push the arrow and make sure that you're using the microphone array and your speakers. I'm not the technology person, but that's the best I can do.
yeah, it's same as your system is the thing you want to click is the easiest, Lynn.
Okay.
But either of those, if you're still on the one from last night, we left the computer audio, so anyway. So Alicia is, we see her unmuting, but there's no sound coming out, so.
Right, and she doesn't know why we can't hear her.
Yeah, I think if you go, there's in most of our Zoom programs, next to the microphone, there's a small arrow on the left, lower left. And I think when you click on that arrow, you get to the microphone selections. So
Now she's going out and maybe coming back in.
okay, so in any event, I think that the basic question was whether there's any additional questions of Amy or Guilford. And I have seen none, so I want to thank both of you.
Andy, she has her hand up and she just connected to audio, so maybe we test it
Okay,
again.
hold on just a second. Alicia?
Hi, I just wanted to see if you all could hear me now.
Yes, we can.
Okay, I'm not sure what just happened. But I'm hoping that my vote counted. You all got it right. So I appreciate your patience here.
We
So you
counted,
voted abstain, correct?
Yes, thank you.
yes, that is how it is recorded, Alicia. So the last question was whether there are any additional questions that members of the committee have of Guilford or Amy. Otherwise, we're going to let them get on to other things, and we're going to move to our second agenda item.
A big thanks to all of you.
Thank you, Guilford and Amy. I appreciate it.
Well, and I'll just say, like, you know, two things. First, Andy, if you guys need me at TSO, like, I'm happy to continue to be as involved as I need to be to keep moving this forward. We all know this is my baby. So just let me know. And the other thing, like, even if I do have to say rejigger the regs to change the ownership thing, knowing that this is going to be a conversation, all that effort to make the regs say this isn't going to be lost, because I have a feeling we're going to come back, and the fact that we had this set up this way, you know, it'll make it easier, you know, if you know, ultimately that decision is changed. So I don't want anybody being too overly concerned about how much work, because it's not lost work in this process, I don't think. So.
Okay, well, thank you. Of course, I can't predict what TSO is going to want, and I think you're likely, if you hear from somebody on the committee, it'll be Anna.
Okay.
I guess.
Thank you.
I'll keep you posted on the TSO agenda, Amy.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So we're ready to move on to our other item. We definitely need to make sure, let me go back and look at the listing of attendees now. Could you bring in Anna and Mandy in, because they need to be part of this meeting now. Okay, Mandy, can you hear us? Can you confirm your?
I'm present.
And Anna?
Good morning, everyone. Nice to see you.
Okay, and I can talk to you later because it's now an unrelated subject, but I don't know if you caught what was going on with the last portion of the meeting.
I came in right at the end, so I was planning to call you after and catch up.
Yes, please do so.
Thank you.
Yeah, that'll be easier. Okay, so we're now going to switch to the second subject of the two main items, which is the proposed special act on residential property transfer fees. And the first part of the discussion I think is the just general questions that came up, and I sent to you the list of questions which I had provided also to the two co-sponsors. And I think that Sean, you had looked at it and concluded that there were only two of the questions that had any bearing on staff ability to respond to. And the two that
Yeah.
why don't you talk about the answer, just say what you need to say about those two.
Sure. So the question number 2, can the assessor's office incorporate expected revenue from a property when making evaluation? The short answer is yes, but there are some, there's a lot more context to that response. And that's going to be the discussion on Thursday with CRC that has also been scheduled as a finance committee meeting starting at 5:30, I believe. So the full response to that question will be Thursday at 5:30, and the assessor will have a presentation on that. And then the second part was the piece about the homestead, the question about how many properties in Amherst are owner occupied without a homestead exemption. So I just asked the assessor 2 seconds ago if we have that information, and the town does not. So we would have to submit a request to the Registry of Deeds to find out, can they provide that information for every home in Amherst, and then we would have to sort of go through a process to figure out which ones are owner occupied or not owner occupied. So the answer to that question is we don't have a quick way of doing it. We would have to do some research and work with the Registry of Deeds.
Okay, and the other one that I had mentioned was question 9. I didn't, what I said in my response to Sean when he brought it up was his possibility that Paul may have additional comments about the relationship with our legislators, and that therefore they might, but otherwise maybe I'll see if Mandy or Anna have any responses to other questions and how you would like to proceed to respond to those questions.
I guess our question would be, do you want us to just go down the questions or have committee members ask specific ones that they're still curious about? Because we can just go down and answer some of them, if that's how you want us to proceed.
Unless I see a hand go up from a member of the committee with a request to do something different, I think we should just go through the questions in order, because they were provided by committee members, and it was a matter of trying to get the information, get the questions to you in advance and to the staff in advance. And then if there are additional questions that committee members have after we do that, then we will turn to the committee and ask if there are additional questions.
Okay, Anna, do you want me to just sort of go through and then you can add anything I miss?
Yeah, that'd be great. I'm in the car, so I don't have the document up.
Excellent. Okay, so question number
Thank
one.
you.
Question number 1 was whether we could seek legislation that would enable the council to adopt a bylaw that may vary from specific language of that legislation. So our belief is that no, we can't. If the legislation passes, if the special act passes, any bylaw we enact has to conform to that legislation, just like any bylaw we enact has to conform to any state law. We can't contradict it. It's one of the reasons, though, that we are seeking a special act that is as general as possible, so that it gives us as much leeway as possible in any future bylaw we were to adopt, so that we have, as much flexibility as we can. Any mandatory exemption we put in a special act must be in a bylaw, can't be changed unless we go back to the legislature. So we only want to put any exemptions in the special act that we are sure we would never want to change. Or that we think are necessary for the special act to pass would be another way to say it. Also, similarly, any distribution that we put in a special act can't be changed. So if there's some way we would want to distribute it that maybe in the future we want to change, we want it general in the special act and specific in the bylaw. Are there any questions on that before I move on? Seeing none. Sean answered question number 2 about the assessor's office. We'll talk about that at CRC on Thursday. Question number 3 was about when tax changes, that there's studies out there that when tax changes increase, well, when tax rates increase, rents tend to rise to absorb 80 to 90% of those tax payments. And the question then was, what mechanisms are put in place to avoid landlords passing the transfer fee on to renters? And so again, that's a bylaw issue. That's not necessarily the special act issue, but and so we would say that needs more study or potential more research at the time a bylaw would be enacted instead of right now. But property tax changes are yearly changes, is one response we would have. Whereas, you know, when our property tax rises every year on our own homes or on the rental properties in town, that rise in costs is every year, a yearly expense. Like a mortgage or like that property tax. But the fee we are proposing under the special act is a one-time fee. It's similar to a fee you might pay in closing costs to, you know, I think I had fees to pay for the oil in my tank. I had fees to pay for the registration of the deed. I had fees to pay the attorney. Those were one-time fees. And so we are not sure that one-time fees would be annually put into a rental payment versus that mortgage payment over 30 years is figured out a way to put in over 30 years. Mortgage is a yearly expense, but a one-time expense can be distributed over 30 or 40 years or absorbed, and we just don't know what would happen with that. Similarly, that's our similar answer to the number 4 question, which is about commercial rents. Is there any evidence that tax increases on rental properties affect rents on those properties? So yearly tax increases that are expenses incurred year after year, the assumption is that they do. But a one-time fee, like we are proposing in the special act, may or may not be absorbed by the landlord, or may not be passed on. That's a lot harder to determine. So those are answers basically to questions 3 and 4. Andy.
Yeah, the only thing I want to point out is that when I looked at the 2 studies, the MIT study, which was from another member of the committee, had sent that in. It was focusing on the commercial rents, and so that's where those numbers came from, a study that was focusing in that direction. Then I looked at to see if there were other studies that had to do with residential, which is where the K-State study, the one that's the second listed link, has to do with the subject of residential. But I think what you're saying in combination after that clarification is still that both of them were talking about not real estate taxes, but one-time transfer fees, and that applies to both. Bernie? You muted the.
Yeah. Right. The MIT study was the answer to the MIT study is actually maybe, because any landlord who's in a competitive or in a strong enough position is going to try to get a net lease where all the property tax increases are absorbed by the renter. And again, this is related to commercial property. And if you have a net lease in a commercial property, you can get preferable rates on the borrowing and the like. It doesn't impact a one-time fee on a limited range of residential properties. The study, the Kansas one, was kind of interesting because it sort of proves that it's cloudy when it rains. When you raise real estate taxes, you're going to raise rates. And again, this is a one-time fee. And what it overlooks is, this is a study of a number of communities in the Midwest. College towns have a somewhat different I just lost my notes here on my screen. College towns have a little bit of a different economy to them. Residential properties in college towns typically carries about a 10% premium over non-college towns. In college towns with lots of conservation property have another premium. So it really doesn't address the Amherst market. And again, this is not an ongoing expense, it's a one-time fee. So these were nice finds, but not relevant.
Okay, thank you. Some of this will come back up in with our discussion on Thursday when we meet together with CRC. The whole question has come up because of, you know, the one suggestion that we look at this and that, you know, it's really goes a little bit beyond just the transfer fee discussion. So going back to Mandy, we're on to question 5, I believe.
Question 5, and question 5 was about whether this is double taxation because Massachusetts has a real estate transfer tax, or known as a deed recording tax in some instances, paid at the time of sale. I'm not sure exactly. I think it's paid to the registry, but it goes to the state. And so, you know, our response to that is it's not double taxation from the point of view of, you know, not allowable double taxation in the sense that we have meals taxes, lodging taxes, cannabis taxes that all have both state taxes and local taxes on them. And so if this were to be considered a tax, we would respond that it operates in the same manner that meals, lodging, and cannabis taxes do, where the state authorizes the town to adopt a local option tax. And that's what essentially our special act is asking for, is asking the state to allow us to opt into a local transfer fee. Call it a fee, call it a tax, but it would be allowed by the state in the same manner that the other local taxes we've opted into have been. Which takes me to number 6, which the question was, should the voters need to vote on this? So those local option taxes are adopted by the town legislature. I think in a town meeting form, they might have actually been adopted by the select board, not even the legislature, but nowadays they are adopted by the town council. The town council adopted, I believe, the cannabis local option tax. We would adopt the local option meals and lodging if there were any changes to that. There are other proposed local option taxes at the state level right now that if they passed, it would be up to the town council to adopt or not adopt them as the town's legislature. And so our response to question 6 is that this special act would be treating the transfer fee the very same way state laws treat local option taxes on how they're adopted, and frankly, how other fees in town are adopted. It's the town council that adopts most fees in town, including, you guys were just discussing the water and sewer rates, fees in some sense. You know, and without necessarily a vote by the voters. So any questions on our responses to items 5 and 6? Seeing none, I'll move on to number 7, which was about an owner who is owner occupying for a while and then they move out and then create a rental for a number of years. And there was a question about, is there a grace period during which that rental property is treated as an owner occupied property? So our special act for the transfer fee would apply only upon transfers. So if the property is never sold, the fee is never paid. Whether or not the bylaw that would have been eventually be adopted would say you should pay a fee. If you don't actually transfer the property, there is no fee. So if I have my home and I move out and I begin renting it, I don't pay a fee. There's no grace period because there's no fee due because I haven't changed the ownership of the property. If after 7 or 8 years, of it being a rental, I decide to sell it, depending on how the bylaw is written, depends on whether that a fee would be due at that point, and whether it would be the full fee or half of a fee, because of my side versus the buyer's side. It would all depend on how the bylaw is written, but there would be no fee upon change of use, because change of use is not the criteria for determining the fee and the payment of the fee. It's change of ownership. Any questions on that one? Seeing none, I'll move on to 8, which was the homestead exemption. Sean answered that there's no quick way of doing it. We said we don't know, but we did think about some examples where there may not be a homestead exemption by an owner occupied property. And the example we would give is my neighbor who owns the property and occupies it about 7 or 8 weeks a year, because it's a second home. And once every 6 to 8 weeks, the owner comes in and visits and then leaves, and no one occupies it the rest of the year. It's still owner occupied, but since it's a second home, it probably does not have a homestead exemption. I don't know whether it does, but our guess would be that that's an example of owner occupied homes that do not have homestead exemptions, second homes. That's the best we could do with number 8. And with that, I'll move on to number 9, which was a question about Senator Comerford and Representative Dom, knowing that that this proposed special act retains the option not to enact the bylaw should the legislation be enacted. And the answer to that is they are aware of that. We are not the only community whose special act proposal operates that way, instead of operating with an automatic institution of the transfer fee upon adoption or upon third. Most of them, if they do it without that option, they do it effective 60 days or 120 days or after the special act passes and is signed by the governor. But that's only a subset of the number of special acts. We are in the other subset that have the acts effective immediately, but require further council action or town meeting action to actually institute the fee, because the fee is up to a certain amount and is determined by future bylaw.
Any questions to follow up on what's been presented in response to the questions we assembled in advance? If not, are there other questions that members of the committee have, or comments that members of the committee have at this point? Kathy.
Let me just try and figure out how to frame it. Mandy, I appreciate that this is as general as we can be to get approval for this. Do you anticipate a pushback from, we have not put in that we would exempt any property under X, this would only apply to transfers of properties over X or Y or whatever the threshold, because one of the things you said that are in the places that have done this, they had that feature. So I don't know whether there's a way to get a reading. I think that's a good idea, so I'm not advocating putting it in. And I certainly think when we talk about it at the council level or public level, we should say that's the intent in the bylaw to do that, as you have. So it's really a question of what we haven't put in the bylaw. Will we be challenged? So for example, that people don't want the transfer fee to apply to, not that we're selling any properties in Amherst with houses on them of $200,000 or $150,000, that they want some minimum threshold that it wouldn't apply to. So that's a question. And then, I don't know where farms come in in all of this. So is the way this is framed, and again, farms don't often change hands as farms. But would our bylaw protect farmers if one farm wants to change to another ownership? I know this language said if it's a son, daughter, a cousins inheriting the farm, that would be fine. So those are just two separate places that if we don't have to be specific in this, that's fine. But if we get asked about impact in Amherst, I want to be able to have answers to.
I think, Mandy, if I can jump in really quickly, I think something on your first question, Joe, Mindy, Mandy, and myself, God, that's a hard sentence, is we've been in regular contact regarding this. And I know Mindy specifically is speaking to some of the legislators who have brought this forward for other towns. So, they've been very well appraised of our process and our progress. And I think that if things come up that they want the home rules that we want to pass, right? And so I think that if something comes up in their conversations with other legislators that they're going to tell us, hey, take this into consideration, we will bring that back to the council, right? Before it's passed. And so we'll definitely bring that forward to them in terms of, do you see a problem with the way that we're doing this, not having a minimum in there, it's specified in the special act. But thus far, it hasn't been an issue. The second part of your question, anybody else struggling with that 5 hours of sleep thing? The second part of your question, farms. So the farm question, I mean, that could be something that we specify in the bylaw. It could be either by zoning type, it could be if it has a agricultural restriction. I think that there are opportunities in the bylaw to exempt farms if that's something that the council ultimately believes should be part of that bylaw. Mandy, did I miss anything?
No, I was going to say the same thing about farms. I think that would depend on how they're categorized, as Anna was saying, and something we could deal with in the bylaw. But I wanted to say, so there are a couple of special acts. Our special act that does not put in exemptions, say over certain thresholds, is not unusual for the special acts in the State House that were in the State House last session. We're in the process of refiling, right? Many people are refiling if they have to refile the special acts. But for example, Brookline has they do have a first 500,000 would be exempted from the fee. But when you look at Arlington's is transfers for less than 50% to 150% of the state medium sale as determined, are exempt. So there's ranges in some of these, right? And so not every special act has a specific range. Provincetown, from what I can briefly, I'm trying to go through some of these quickly, has no range. Theirs is equal to 0.5% on the purchase of transfer of any real property interest in any property situated in the town of P-Town, and then they do some exemptions. But their basic first sentence is the same as our first sentence in our special act. So it's not an unusual thing to not put in something, because some do it. Some special acts are there for to try and impose a transfer fee over a certain threshold, like, so 200% of AMI or something like that. But other transfer fee special acts have been put in not to impose a transfer fee for properties that cost or sell for over a certain threshold. They've put it in for properties that are not owner occupied, no matter the threshold. So it really just depends on what each individual town's goal has been, and Anna's and I's goal is to sort of do a combination of those two, the non-occupieds at any threshold and owner occupieds or any residential above a certain threshold. And so that's why we've left it so general, but it just depends on what each town has been doing.
And that's the bylaw side of it,
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So long.
Thank you, Andy. These are maybe questions for down the road, but they come up from different circumstances I've observed. In section 2, you talk about exempting transfers to or from the federal government, the Commonwealth, the town, or entities and so forth. In the town of Amherst, I'm aware of at least one property, I don't know what its value is, that was given to the university. Now, that's a gift, but it was, you know, a very worthwhile gift, and it took it off the tax rolls. And you know, it's there. I'm also aware of another property that the people who live there intend upon their demise to also give it to the university. And at what point do these properties that may have seriously high value, you know, it sounds as if they would be exempt. And yet not only are they being transferred to a nonprofit and being taken off the tax rolls, but they're high value properties that we will therefore not get this fee for at all. So that's my first question.
So I'll try to tackle that one.
A good one.
We did not come across a single special act that was proposed that did not have this full out exemption in about transfers to or from the federal government or the Commonwealth, let alone municipalities and all. And so it is our belief that without that exemption in there, our special act would have absolutely no chance of passing.
Okay.
Because you know, the state's the state, right? They don't want to pay fees to municipalities no matter why.
Yeah, it's an interesting, I'm going to say it, loophole. Okay.
Yeah. And I'm curious what other measures separate from this might be approached, but I think that, like Mandy said, it needs to be separate from this special act, because I don't think that I mean, this is already a tough one at the state level, right? We're fighting a lot. So I think keeping that in there for now is going to be necessary.
And the second question, which goes directly, I mean, it's straightforward. Our son has a special needs trust. Upon our demise or the sale of our home, the proceeds of that will go to the special needs trust. I don't normally, you know, discuss my estate issues with people, but I have no idea whether our house at this point or in the future will fall under this law. But what you basically are saying to me is, since it's not going to transfer to him directly, because the property won't remain in the trust, that we're going to have to deduct from that what we're going to transfer to the trust. Is that correct?
There is, I'm trying to find the section that I think Mandy is looking for at the same time, and she's not on her phone.
It's under 6, it gets into real property.
Actually, I should pause just for a second. My intent was is that when we got past general questions, that we would need to pull up the proposed special legislation and actually put it on the screen and discuss it section by section. So, because if we're going to recommend it, I think that the committee has to focus on it. It's only 2 pages of for that.
Right.
So
I'm gonna just really quickly, I'm gonna jump on now that I'm home on my computer. So Sean, I'll be back in a second. Will you let me in from the audience again?
And what I would say to you, Lynn, is that's an exemption that's in the, you know, I wouldn't even call it a draft bylaw, a sample bylaw. And you are right, it's in the sample bylaw. It's under D1-6. I'm not sure why our numbering is kind of weird like that. It's not something that's dealt with in the special act. So it's something that could probably be, again, discussed in more detail. You know, the way I read 6, I don't actually know the answer to it because I'm not a trust and estate lawyer, but I would actually say number 6 might cover your situation potentially. right? You know, sort of already in there for thoughts like that, but we'd have to delve into the actual language that is potentially already being considered as part of this sample that we put forward of intention to answer that, but that's the bylaw side, that's not the special act side.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, this builds on an issue that Bob has raised from the beginning. You know, I bought a home many years ago. It's basically my major asset. I now need to sell that home because I'm moving into Applewood or whatever the case may be. And what you've basically done is taxed my major asset. So it's in that category. Thank you.
Oh, and I know that that's a tough one. And I think that, you know, there's so many different soapboxes we could go down about how that exact problem is totally screwing up our whole real estate market nationwide. But I think that that is the reality. And it's still, my argument would be that the vast majority of sales that would fall under this are still significant assets for their sellers, despite a 1 or 2% fee. That would be my argument. But I recognize that that is a tough part of this for people.
I want to make sure I have the right. Yeah, this is the one that Andy sent me, and also I think
it is the revised one. You can tell if you look at section 3.
Yep, it's the correct one.
So that is the correct one.
It is, because section 3 has the change that the housing trust requested, and that
which is a topic that I want to discuss and focus on when we get there. But why don't we go back up to the top if we're making this shift, and see if there's any questions about the introductory 2 paragraphs or section 1, and we'll just give a moment for committee members to review it again, and then I'll look for hands. Kathy.
So I don't really have questions on the special act. And, you know, I've raised them. I think the explaining any of this to our Amherst residents has much more to do with what the possible bylaw might be. So even, you know, the question Lynn just raised, if I look at your special act section 2, the last little Roman numeral 5 is transfers between family members as may be defined by bylaw. You know, that if you're trying to make sure your kids get your house or the value of your house, whether they are going to live in the house or just sell the house, then but I think these are the kind of questions we're going to be getting in terms of how much am I protected or not protected. And I actually do agree with you, Anna, that the percent we're talking about is not going to so dilute the value of that asset that it stops that from happening. So so I'll stop there. So it's the special act, and my understanding is we have to move soon on the special act, and we can go on forever on the contents of the bylaw, which may well happen in terms of reaching any agreement on what the contents are. So it's because that's where people are going to really be pushing for a higher threshold, pushing for more exemptions, deciding whether we come in at 2 or whether we come in at 0.5%, you know, all of the above. So I'm just going to stop there because I think this, I agree at the generalness of the way this is written. And as all of you know, I think the town needs money. So the allocating this directly piece of it to the Affordable Housing Trust, I thought that was a good piece about it, that we would be, this is trying to make housing more affordable in Amherst. Is good. So we'll stop. I'm in favor of this as written.
So I'm going to go on to credit to section 3 unless somebody has a question about one or before 3. Bob?
Yeah, I wanted to actually talk about section 2 and Roman numeral 4 in there, transfers with consideration under $100. First of all, I don't understand why that's there because it's $100 or less, or less than $100 transfer. Isn't that excluded in general? And secondly, why $100? I mean, we just, as part of our estate planning, did a transfer for exactly $100. We could have done it for $99, but we did it for $100. So I don't understand why that's even in there.
So the list of exemptions in section 2 is basically the exact list that is in every special act we looked at. So all 8 or 9 of them, and they all had $100. So we went with what everyone else had. I will say I had the same thought as you, Bob. Most of the sort of transfers for putting it into a trust, changing the trust, things like that are all $100, but they all, every single special act had the consideration under $100.
I believe the idea is that it covers the type of property transfers that are considered gifts. So when people do it for $1 or, or $99, like you said, I agree that 100 does feel like a pretty arbitrary number. And I suppose that I don't have any problem with being flexible on that particular number. We could make it 101. But I do believe that the intention there is to cover property transfers that are considered more of gifts. So I mean, if you look at our property transfer records, you'll see a number that were sold for $1. Not that many, but a few.
Yeah, just so, that's what we did years ago.
Yeah.
And then when we did it recently, it was $100. So
Inflation,
it's all arbitrary anyway.
It is a little arbitrary. I think the idea was that this covered most of what people typically would utilize when they were gifting property.
But again, if you transfer for $100, you're not subject to any tax, right? I mean.
So I think that the idea here is that, well, I suppose if you were transferring to a non-owner to be a rental, this would exempt you, because the way that we wrote our sample bylaw, hypothetically, it's on the full purchase price. So this could exempt folks who sell a rental property to another landlord for under $100. That would be the small gap that this creates. I think what this also does is shows the legislature that regardless of where we set our limit, we are exempting gifts of property under a certain amount. I'm calling them gifts because I feel like that's my understanding of why someone would do this. But I think this is to say, because we're allowing ourselves regulation by bylaw, we're still going to allow people to gift property.
So
why not increase it to some nominal amount?
Well, what I was going to say is we could leave the 100 in here because it's the standard language of every special act we've looked at, but it does not prohibit us in the bylaw from turning that number from 100 to 200. We can't lower it from 100 to 99, but the bylaw could increase it from 100 to 200 or from up to 500 or some number that tracks some sort of inflation. As Bob said, it used to be a lot of times they were $1 and now they seem to be standardized at 100 for some reason, right? And so it could track that in the bylaw. It would never be able to go less than 100. So whatever number is put in here, it can never go less than that.
Price is right.
But it could always go higher than that.
Yeah.
In a bylaw.
Bob, do you have a number in mind that you think that's coming? I'm curious if 100 feels too low, if there's something that
it just doesn't make any sense. It would not be subjected. You're saying the sale price is $100. It makes no sense. It's like it's throwing something in there that's completely irrelevant.
Yeah, I think it's a reassurance to the legislature, to be honest. That's my understanding because they aren't seeing our bylaw. But I do understand how it could be perceived as not relevant.
I mean, you're just going to change everybody to gifting to $99 rather than $100. I mean, it's just an arbitrary number and it makes no sense. That's all. I understand your issue with how it's worded with the state, and that's fine. But, you know, just make sure everybody understands this. So, I mean, what would happen if you had a gift for $100? Would you tax the entire
It would be a $2 tax if it
would be
didn't get exempted from some other reason in the bylaw.
Watch out, Sean, that capital improvement fund. It's gonna get hit with $2 everywhere. But yeah, that's correct. But if it were if most likely, like you said, it would be exempted elsewhere. It would have to fit that specific niche in order to apply.
So the other question is, what is the cost in staff time and other expenses in the finance department to collect a $2 fee?
I think that, my estimate is that the likelihood of folks selling what is a revenue generator for them in a rental property to someone else who is going to utilize it as a revenue generator for under $100 will happen very infrequently. And so, I mean, I think it's a really interesting hypothetical, but I think the reality is that this will not happen often. And so I don't actually think that the staff time for collecting those specific fees who have managed to not be exempt through any other way will be that great.
Andy, on this issue, Bernie may also. So what I'm gathering is this section 2, the way you've written it, is very similar to what you've seen in other municipalities.
Yes.
And so in some ways, it's like we're coming into the legislature with basically sections of this that we think are going to be common across all of them. It takes away that negotiation piece and leaves open possibly other negotiation pieces.
And I don't want to discount the importance of that when, this type of home rule is, I mean, there's no easy home rule. We've seen that, right? But I think showing that there are commonalities and that it's important that each community has slightly different needs is really important. So having a general foundation and underpinning that legislators have seen before, that they're familiar with, it helps. And that's my opinion, but I believe it helps, will help.
And I would just say, as I said, we can't, if you look at the last paragraph of section 2, we can't eliminate or reduce these exemptions, but we can increase them so that 100 can, when we're looking at a bylaw to actually impose the fee, it could be turned to, as Andy said, 10,000 because of costs to implement a fee that's under 10,000, right? And again, it goes to the bylaw.
Okay.
Bernie?
I want to start by saying I got my law education from Google University. And I'm not a lawyer, so pour salt on this, but I believe the answer to this question is somewhere in general law, chapter 64D, which governs paying transfer taxes. So if if the people want to go ahead and check that or talk to someone who does a lot of property law, that would be helpful. So if it doesn't make any sense, it's probably because it's buried in the general laws. And if you want something, you need to pay attention to the general laws. You can't violate those in any special act. So my guess is if we've got the under $100 there, it's because it nods to chapter 64D.
It's a really good point, Bernie. I don't know that off the top of your head. We went to the same law school, so I will. I'll confirm that though.
Okay. Going to move on to section 3, and we keep referring to other communities that have these, and you still haven't sent the
Sorry, Andy.
document you were going to send. Are there cities or towns that already have special legislation and have enacted a program for a real estate transfer fee, or is it still all pending legislation, special act requests?
I believe that the successful one has been Nantucket, but it was a slightly different one where they created a transfer fee that goes to a land bank. So it's much more for conservation versus housing. That's my understanding. I believe this is still very much the good fight at the state level. Mandy, do you have a different understanding?
That's my understanding too.
So we have no towns we can really talk to about their experience at administering a program. Section 3.
Well, hang on, sorry, just if I can briefly, Andy. Oh my gosh, sorry, my computer has been so glitchy. While there are none within Massachusetts, if folks are interested, this is something that's very common around the country. And so there are areas that there are cities across the US that have done this and could be, oh, sorry, I look like an old TV show, could be spoken to, and I can try to pull some if you'd really like me to, but this is not something that is unique to Massachusetts. And in fact, in some other states, it's very commonplace.
Okay, that's helpful. I don't know if, I think at this point, I would care more about that when we get to the bylaw stage, if we have the permission to get to the bylaw stage, and that the goal right now is to see if we can come to agreement on special legislation to file that would get us there. So I don't think that it's an issue that needs to come up right away. Section 3, I have, I guess, strong disagreement with what the Affordable Housing Trust has suggested, because I think it is important for us to recognize what Kathy has been saying all along about the extent of the problems that exist within the town in not having revenue growth, that in the consequences which affect all that we do, including affordable housing, but everything else that we do, and including education, for example. And so I feel like we've already in the special act, by allocating a portion that is named, and I just don't like the idea of having it included in the section for additional funds. I think that is always available to the council, and the council can make any appropriate appropriation, but that I don't know that calling it out is fair to all of the other needs within the community. And it's an advocate group that is speaking from a particular perspective, but there are lots of others that could make that request and do it validly, like our schools. So I just want to say that I am concerned about that.
Yeah, I hear that concern, Andy. I think my most recent conversations specifically with Mindy about this really are emphasizing the need to keep it in. We are one of, I believe, of only a few that are including allocations outside of the trust. So many of the special acts that have been filed have the entirety of the revenue going automatically to the housing trust. I agree with you that we have much stronger, well, no, we have other pressing needs in Amherst where this revenue would be very necessary. But my concern is actually just in keeping those in there at all and having the legislature be okay with it. And so I think that having the housing trust be one of the three that it could be, and again, we by bylaw determine that split, which is important to note. I think that gives us more of a chance because of how strongly these have been tied to housing, because they have to do with housing. So while I understand where you're coming from, especially, you know, I think that there's no reason why general funds couldn't go to housing. I think that there's a really strong case for keeping it in there, in terms of demonstrating that this is a really important element about this is stabilizing and increasing affordable opportunities.
Yeah, I guess I don't like the idea of it being done by bylaw. I think it should be done by annual appropriation. And but let's go on and have a broader conversation. Matt? Hands.
Thanks, Andy. And yeah, this is a very broad question, and Anna and others, I really appreciate all the work that's gone into this, and I think it is, you know, potentially a really great revenue stream. And I'm just going to give I really just, I don't have a great understanding of the entire bylaw, so special legislation and bylaw, but I want to just make sure that I'm understanding the core argument, which is, you know, that there is that concern about the cost being passed on to renters. And I want to make sure I understand that the core argument is that this is not a regressive fee or tax, because most of our affordable housing, we see the renters who are most directly affected by this as not being renters who are accessing affordable housing, but folks who are accessing rental properties for other reasons. So I guess I'm kind of making an assumption here, which was in some of those questions, that you know, this fee does get passed through into the rent, and so it does raise the rent on most rental property in town, you know, outside of the affordable housing zone. And so I guess I would ask, you know, first, if that's accurate, if that's how, you know, we're characterizing this, and then second, you know, I guess, you know, ultimately this is raising the rent on the university grad students and undergrads, and so, you know, what are some of the downstream implications of that? You know, have we talked to folks in the university who work on housing matters? You know, I don't know, what are some of the implications there in terms of our ongoing partnership with the universities? Those are probably broad and probably have more assumptions baked into them than, you know, anybody's comfortable with, but I just wanted to kind of put that out there as that's kind of where my ponderings sit right now.
Matt, I think it's interesting. To your first point, I believe that the way we have drafted, or the draft of our, I'm looking quickly. So we, number 2, in section 2, Roman numeral 2, transfers of real property subject to an affordable housing restriction would be exempted from this. So yes, affordable, anything that holds an affordable housing restriction would not be subjected to any sort of fee. The second question is interesting. I think one, it does make the assumption, and I challenge this assumption, that this would lead to a rise in rents in over the course of or across town. And so I think, you know, when we look at that, like Mandy said earlier, 30-year or a one-time fee over a 30-year mortgage looks a lot different than an annual increase or an annual fee for the life of that mortgage. So I also think, you know, to be realistic, I think that this is having a rental property is a business in a lot of ways, right? It's a revenue generator for an individual or a few individuals. And so they're going to charge what they can charge, regardless of what we do in a lot of senses. And so I think that a one-time fee, while it may impact, I think that impact would be a lot less than if this were an annual, because if you look at a 1% or a 2% fee of a purchase price and spread it over 30 years, it's very different than if you were looking at a 2% increase every year. That was a little rambly, but I hope it helps respond.
Yeah, I agree with you, Anna. though I do want to point out that the Finance Committee may want to come back to this issue when we get into the question of fee proposals related to rental registration, because that will be an ongoing fee as opposed to a one-time. And how landlords react to ongoing expenses as opposed to one-time expenses is likely to be very different. I can't say with certainty because I'm not in the business myself. I have no evidence of it, but that is something that we will need to reconsider and return to at that point. Bernie, I see your hand up.
Thanks, Andy. I want to concur with Andy's concerns about this being done by bylaw rather than by annual act of the council. I also want to raise concerns that, well, it's all well and good that we focus on affordable housing. There is, because of the rental situation in town, there is a explicit lack of affordable middle class housing. It's very difficult for young families to of reasonable means to relocate into Amherst and stay. And we can see that in terms of our dropping school enrollments. So to refer back to the paper from the University of Kansas that was included in the questions, that paper suggests that one of the ways that you can make property more affordable is by not privileging certain types of property and using that to raise revenues that will then go to cover other expenses and in effect lower taxes. So money that this is collected here that's going to go offset capital needs will help stabilize, or maybe even, miracles happen, lower tax rates, which would also benefit the renters. I also think that we shouldn't assume that because someone is renting that they're necessarily a person of low income. It could well be that not everybody feels compelled to own property, for one, and for two, there's a difference, I think, between someone who's settled into Amherst for the long term and is renting because they can't afford to buy into housing, against someone who's transient, who's here for 3 or 4 years and it's going to move on. So I'll get off my soapbox now. Thank you.
Andy, if I could just respond to that real quick, I certainly didn't, and I apologize if I if I came across the wrong way. I certainly did not mean to make any implication about what a renter is or is not in terms of their income level. I was pointing out what Anna helpfully clarified, which is, that this is this explicitly sidesteps, impacting affordable housing rent costs.
That's the goal. One of the many goals.
Yeah, so I just wanted to respond to Andy and Bernie with, I think this is one of the sections that Anna and I, and Anna will surely correct me if she doesn't believe the same thing, have said needs discussed and needs agreed upon. We put it in we put the allocation originally between the stabilization fund and the general fund in a bylaw allocation so that number could be modified and didn't have to always be, say, an even split, or didn't always have to be 25-75 of remaining or something, because once it's in the special act, it's stuck. Because we're just assuming if we get this special act passed through the legislature and the governor, it's never changing, is the assumption we're operating on. And so that's why we put it there as a bylaw allocation. The AMAHT made some decent arguments as to why they should potentially have some potential share of that. Their goal would be a 1/3 share. I don't believe Anna and I ever agreed to that. We said that's a discussion for when a bylaw comes through. what I would say is if finance wants something different or wants it out of the bylaw and into the special act, that is something that could be done and the language could be found. You know, that's it. If finance wants that, finance recommends it out, right? That way. I will say of the 10 communities that have filed special acts, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of them give it 100% to the housing trust. 1 gives it 100% to a housing fund for the purpose of creating and preserving affordable and or attainable housing in the town, which is up to 200% under their definition in the special act. That was Chatham. Provincetown says 250,000 to the capital improvement stabilization fund with the remains to the general fund. So again, not, and Brookline is quote, projects related to affordable housing. Wellfleet is 50,000 to the capital improvement stabilization fund, remains to the housing trust. And then there's Boston. So of eight of the 10 have no ability to change any of their allocations. They've put it in the special act specifically with no ability to change. Brookline's got this projects related to affordable housing without where it goes other than that. And then there's Boston, which puts it all into the neighborhood trust unless by ordinance. And then there's random wording that basically says, unless by ordinance, they do something else with it is how we summarized it for projects designed to address housing disparities. And they've got a whole list. So Boston also does it by ordinance potentially. That's the angle we took. If finance doesn't like it, finance could recommend a different way, but it would need to decide what the split is within the special act between the various options.
Well, the first $250,000 has been in the proposed special act for a while, automatically going to the Affordable Housing Trust. You know, I think the question then obviously comes to the balance of above 250 in any given year. And frankly, I think it should go to the general fund for allocation by the council through the budget process as it deems appropriate, which can include the Affordable Housing Trust, a stabilization fund, or other purpose.
Is there a reason why we couldn't put in the bylaw that would be revisited annually by the council, that allocation would be revisited on an annual basis?
The 250,000 or?
No, we had talked, yeah, I mean, yes, and the general split. We had talked about it being regulated by bylaw, but Andy, you had said that, you know, your concern would be that it would be set by bylaw and then set. And I think if we could write something in any future bylaw that Lynn's got thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, the bylaw, of course, is whatever you put in an allocation of bylaw. To change a bylaw is a more complex process.
No,
to change a fee and a division of a fee. Sorry. I don't know. Kathy and Lynn, I think both have thoughts on this. So
yeah.
Sean has his hand
Sean,
up.
let's go to Sean.
This is an easy one, and I'm just checking to see if there's interest. Would it be helpful to know if the fee could be deposited in the Community Preservation Act fund instead of the affordable housing? I don't know the answer to it, and I can find out if anyone is interested in that as an alternative to the housing trust. Obviously, if it went into the CPA fund and if that's allowable, that has the option to go to the housing trust at that point still, or it could be used for other CPA eligible purposes, but it would still go through it would still put it within a council, make it an annual decision, as opposed to being an automatic type thing.
I would really caution the committee from moving more away from affordable housing. I think that the more that we push this away from funding going to affordable housing, the more we are dropping its chances in the legislature. That's my understanding. But I appreciate that creative thinking, Sean.
So I would say right now, the sample bylaw has, because it's a sample, the remaining funds collected each fiscal year shall be deposited in equal amounts into the town of Amherst Capital Improvement Stabilization Fund and General Fund. As Anna was saying, some sample bylaw or some future bylaw could potentially say, could figure out, or maybe the special act could say, there's probably a way to say, something shall be deposited in the capital improvement, these funds, in accordance with a council's annual budget, or some wording like that could probably go into the bylaw instead of the way it says right now in the sample bylaw.
Again, would the sample bylaw go to the legislature as a part of this process? I would have thought not.
Not in the intent right now. Just the special act would. So the sample bylaw would have to deal with all three if we leave the AMAHT in the second half of it. But
Andy, just real quick on that same topic. I think the discussion is about whether it should go into the capital stabilization fund or be general revenue. Is that the discussion? I mean, there's no shortage of capital needs, right? We know there's going to be lots of capital needs in the future. And the council, if it felt that the capital stabilization fund was building up too high because of this fee, it could always just decrease how much is available for capital for cash capital. So there's other mechanisms where the council, if they felt like we had plenty in the capital stabilization fund, which I don't think you ever will, but if you ever did feel like there was plenty there, the offset would be to look at how much we're putting into capital on the cash capital side through the capital improvement program.
Kathy?
Sean said most of what I was just going to say, that if we can fix these draft bylaw language to leave some flexibility on this on annual, I think similarly, the way I think of the Affordable Housing Trust, seeing that it comes to CPA every year asking for 500,000, if it was getting funded, it allows more CPA money for other needs. So this year it was cut back because of the way it interacted with two big housing people. So I think the funds are actually more fungible than this makes it look. I think this is a good selling point, that we're trying to fund. This is about housing. And Andy, on the allocation, if they can write the bylaw that way, since every year we're figuring out whether it's 8%, 9%, 10% of general revenues is going to capital. If there was another source that was funding capital, then the general fund gets a breather on this. I think we've got a lot of discretion because that's an annual decision. We haven't prejudged in perpetuity 10%, 10.5. So I feel like as long as the bylaw doesn't tie the hands, the actual bylaw, doesn't say, X percent, X percent, X percent allows as determined annually by the council. I think that would be a much better way of going, that the bylaw enables the flexibility. So that's just my view, because I think it is a selling point, potentially even to the broader public, that we're trying to stabilize housing in Amherst. We're not trying to make it more expensive. So we'll stop there.
Andy, I have my hand up.
Yes. Go ahead.
What I'm hearing, I keep focusing on the special legislation, and I realize that I haven't focused enough on the bylaw, but the reality is it's the special legislation that we need to move forward on. And in fact, I I need to go back and check with Mindy, but they even want a placeholder filed as early as the 20th of this month.
She said it's okay if we can get it to council ideally on the 23rd or the following meeting, but there is no deadline for home rules specifically.
Okay. The main thing is that I'm hearing from Mandy Jo and Anna, and that is that to be in the game of the discussion at the state level, this affordable housing stuff still needs to be present. But I think I'm actually very much in agreement with Andy's point of view about wanting the greatest flexibility each year to decide where things go, but that's a bylaw. I think the question really that we need to focus on is the sample legislation and what will put us at the table at the state level that will allow us to be negotiating with our Eastern Mass municipalities who are going to control the conversation. And the Cape. Obviously, it's the Eastern Mass and the Cape.
And the biggest element of that, Lynn, I'm sorry if I can just respond quickly. The most important element there is that it's not a hard number that we're looking above.
Right.
That's the biggest, most important piece.
Right. But we want to be able to be at the table. So we want to
Oh,
get
absolutely.
the legislation, our sample legislation filed so we can be at that table. Bernie?
Yeah.
Andy's in
I
charge,
think-
but I saw your hand up.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry. We're going to have a long time to talk about the bylaw. If this is, because this is special legislation and this will go on for more time than we all care to think about. And I think Lynn's point is right on target, that we need to have something in the game. And as long as we all understand that there's a room for flexibility in bylaw, and I think Anna's point that there's no hard and fast percentages here is a good one. So we should really move forward with the.
Yeah, I agree, and I've said that all along. Actually, I have a suggestion as I keep looking at this and hearing the conversation, and that is just to change one word. Instead of saying as allocated by bylaw at the very end, saying as determined by bylaw. And that gives the arguable flexibility in developing the bylaw to not just do an allocation so much to each group, but actually to make a decision as to how that can be done on an annual basis and how it's done on an annual basis. It's a little bit more flexible, but it still keeps the ability to have the housing trust listed in that second portion, since the feeling is that it will help sell the bylaw. Mandy?
I'm fine with that change, and I'm looking at the word "and" between Town of Amherst General Fund and the Amherst Municipal Affordable Housing Trust, and wondering if it should probably say trust fund, but if the "and" should be "and/or," which would give even more flexibility.
So you want
or the Amherst
Slash
Municipal Housing Trust Fund. We forgot the word fund when we typed.
I also just put an and/or fund.
And again, I forgot the word municipal up at the top 3 lines, the third line of section 3, Amherst Municipal Affordable Housing Trust Fund.
So if there's, let's see, Matt's hand is up yet. Matt?
Andy, I just wanted to ask if we are, if we have a defined end time for this meeting and if we're going to move to a vote, because I won't be able to stay much longer.
My goal is actually to get to a vote, and I think that I don't have questions about the rest of it. Let me just have it up on the screen for a second, see if there are other issues with the language or suggestions, because if not, I think we can move to a vote and then dispose of other issues as appropriate. So seeing none, then it would seem that what we're really need at this point is a motion to recommend that the town council propose a special act to the legislature as presented by the finance committee, which would be the version that has now been edited, or we could word it otherwise. But Lynn.
I'm fine with that. So moved.
Is there a second?
Shane seconds.
Okay, Bill?
Yeah, can you just give me that wording again, Andy?
That the Finance Committee recommends to the town council that it request the adoption of special legislation as presented by the committee in its report.
Okay.
So I think we can go ahead unless there's any other discussion that needs to happen. I'll look for hands for just a second while I get my list of members up. Bob?
Yeah, I just wanted to, if you can scroll down a little bit, where we talk about the Hampshire County Registrar of Deeds is prohibited from recording. Can we do that? The Hampshire Register, this is the end of section 5. Can we tell the Hampshire Registrar of Deeds what they can or can't do?
Well, it's, the legislature would be telling the Hampshire Register of Deeds. Mandy or Anna, is that a common language in other proposed special legislation?
It is. I think if we put it in our bylaw, then we'd have a problem, but it's in the special act, so it's from the state.
So it's sufficient, Bob?
That's fine. I just want to make sure.
So let's go to a vote, and I'll reverse the order this time and start with Alicia.
Abstain.
Okay, going up from then I'm next, and I go yes. Kathy?
Yes.
Michelle?
I don't,
Michelle's still with it?
I
Michelle?
don't think Michelle's in the meeting anymore. I don't know when she left.
Okay, I'm in the market as an absent for the vote. Bernie?
Yes, support.
Matt?
Support.
Bob?
Abstain.
And Lynn?
Aye.
So the vote is 3 yes, 1 abstain, 1 absent from the voting members, and support of 3 members, so that the motion carries.
Thank you.
Thank you
So,
all very much.
Andy, just a clarification, I abstained. I did not.
Bob abstained, Andy.
oh, Bob abstained. Okay, make sure that we get that correct, but I'm gonna need to change. Okay. So with that noted, I'm gonna just go to the, there is no public presence, so I don't have to return to public comment. I'm gonna skip approval of minutes today because we're already past time. Next committee meeting, we know about Thursday, and hope that all can attend. If not, certainly it's going to be available for you to look at a later time. If you have questions in advance of the meeting and you're not going to be able to attend, please send them to Sean and to me, as I had indicated in the prior email to the committee. I think that our next meeting is the day after the next council meeting, as we've currently going, and it will be back to our afternoon hours. I think next council meeting, I believe, is the 23rd. And so it's the 24th would be the date for the next meeting. Is there any other business that people would like to request that was not anticipated in advance?
Just a quick note, Andy, that Lynn will have appointed members to the Finance Committee on the by the 23rd, and then the first order of business on the 24th would be the election of the chair and vice chair.
Thank you for the reminder. So to our resident members, thank you very much for being here. We may or may not be with you depending upon who the president appoints to the committee, but we won't put pressure on her now to indicate anything. And so I don't think we have any other business, and since I see no hands up about unanticipated business requests, thank you very much. Hope to see most of you or all of you on Thursday, and have a good day. Thank you. We're adjourned.
Thanks.